So today I'm so thrilled to have the panelists that we have, and I'll introduce them shortly. But we're also here to listen to you guys. So if there's a topic or a workshop that we're not covering or not thinking about, talk to us. ArtShare is a nonprofit organization, and we're really here to support artists in so many ways. So as you see, we have this building in its beautiful state, and its needing repair state, kind of this beautiful ebb and flow of a warehouse turned into a creative art space. We own this building. We bought it about 25 years ago and turned it into a nonprofit. We have, upstairs we have affordable housing. We have 30 apartments up there. So during this presentation, you may hear somebody vacuuming their floor, or taking a shower, or walking around. And you know, some people tell me, Cheyenne, please, we need them to quiet. Can you go tell them to be quiet? I'm like, this is their house, and this is their living room. So those are all affordable units that artists can lease, stay as long as they need to, and really help to focus on their craft while they're paying affordable rates in this neighborhood. And as you guys may know, the median income around here is about $150,000. So for artists to come in at a $30,000 annual income and be able to live here and have access to Hauser and Worth and all these beautiful amenities the city has to offer is a huge deal. Down here we have our theater space. We have about 5 performances a week that we're constantly churning. We have connections to performing art schools in Los Angeles who come and perform symphonies. Over the weekend we have poetry events. Stay connected to our calendar of events so that you can kind of stay connected to our community. All events are between $10 and $20 so that artists can have access to audiences. And then we have our gallery space. Every month and a half or so we turn that over. And all the artists that are showcased in the gallery come from our submissions pool. So ArtShare is very much about taking and removing barriers to access. So you submit your artwork and you're eligible for a show. You don't have to come in and schmooze me and get to know the curators. You really just have to show us your work and show us that you're serious and dedicated. And we rotate that show 6 to 9 times a year. And we also have partnerships throughout the neighborhood where we're curating different places in Los Angeles. So we're always kind of looking for cool opportunities to make sure artwork is being celebrated. So I do, before I introduce you three, hi. I want to thank Terry Ellsworth, who did the hanging workshop. Terry's tips is a huge part of who we are, our heart here. He's been our installation ambassador here for 10 years now. And he comes from the LA packing world, and he's been installing in Los Angeles for about 40 years. So he just brings so much knowledge. So make sure to meet him. He has business cards he loves to give out if you have any questions on installation. And then I want to thank Luce, who's behind us here. He gave us the NFT 1, 2, 3. And I think we got to 1 and 2, but might still have 3 to get to. But really helped to kind of break down and had everybody download MetaMask and get to know what's coming, how to tangibly connect to it. Do you want me to try a different mic or just keep going? Keep going. Okay. I think he's testing on me before I hand it over to them. Thank God I have pockets on today. Okay, so I would love to introduce the panel that's behind me. And David, I'm just going to introduce you, and then I'll let the panelists talk. That's cool. Okay, so this panel discussion is going to cover the curator's process, getting into the brain of the curator. We have 2 amazing people here, Erika Hirugami and Ava Chimento, who will share their knowledge. And David Pagel will be moderating this discussion. David Pagel is a professor of art theory and history at CGU Arts Department. In addition to his teaching roles, Pagel is known as an art critic and art curator in the circles much bigger than CGU. His rich career within these roles has led him to include courses such as studio art, surveying contemporary art, and the written statement. And Pagel knows both of these curators, so we'll be able to kind of get inside there and really share some good stuff. So David, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much,
Wait.
Yeah. Well, I just thought we'd get started with a three-part question to each of you.
Okay. We got this.
And to me, the parts get more interesting as they go on. And those three parts are, who are you? What do you do? And how did you come to do what you do? Because I always think it's interesting, like people see people out in the world, they're like, oh my gosh, she's always done that. And you scratch the surface and find out like, oh my gosh, she took this really circuitous path there. And I think it's really interesting for people who are new to fields or new to disciplines or students to just like to kind of hear that, get the backstory.
Am I starting? Because this can take the whole 2 hours. But, okay.
Oh, we have till tomorrow.
Oh, perfect. So we're all going to be here. Did everyone bring their jammies? So my name is Erika Hirugami. I'm the founder and CEO of Curator, which is how everyone knows me. But I am also the ED of AHSC, which means I lead the art historians of Southern California, so not just LA, but also Cal. And then on my downtime, when I'm not doing any of that, I'm a doctoral student at UCLA. So how I know David is that I have an MAAB from Sotheby's, and he was my professor way back when, 5 years ago?
Not that long ago.
5 years ago. But how I got here, so I am a first-generation immigrant, right? Formerly undocumented from Mexico. And when I got here, I think I did like 7 years of community college, because right, that's not super easy to do for those who migrate. But afterwards, I ended up at UCLA taking on too many degrees, because I like torture. And after getting a BA in art history, a BA in Mexican studies, and a BA in Chicano studies, I ended up at Sotheby's doing the master's program. So I have a master's in art business. By the time that I got into the art business master's, I was already working at galleries and museums in curatorial positions, but at the master's level, I realized that those two projects don't service my needs. So my graduation project was actually my own enterprise, and now I curate all over the world. I think we're in like 10 different countries at this point, me and my team. So I own a curatorial collective, which is Curatorial.
That's
great. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, bravo.
Awesome.
I don't know how I'm going to beat that. Don't try it. We're just going to go home.
It's not a competition.
I'm out. So I actually took a completely different route. It actually took me 5 years to do the 2 years of community service, because I was working for artists here in Los Angeles, and that's actually how I got my start. I started working for an artist, and I'm going to say her name, which is Phyllis Green. I ended up representing her later on. I was in high school when I was representing her, and I was also going to community college and art center, where I was told that I was too young to be in their program, and that I needed additional life experience. So I actually left and went to New York City and got myself into Parsons, where I studied graphic design for advertising. And while I was there, I actually met a curator from Geneva, and she asked me a question. She said, have you ever seen these museums through a curator's lens? And I didn't even know what a curator was. And I was like, no. And she's like, well, let's go. So we went. I quickly left school that week, moved back to California, and got myself a job in a museum, where I was the head of administration for the Craft and Folk Art Museum. And then I actually ended up working for Patricia Correa, who was in the audience, my first gallery job, and I was hooked. That was it. And from there, I went on to work for Marty Copland, who actually represented Kerry James Marshall, and I got a chance to work with him as well. And then I moved on to Acme, where I met David, and I stood by Acme's artists even after they closed, and still to this day stand by Acme's artists. So, and here I am now. I closed my gallery. I had a gallery for 5 years in Los Angeles, closed it, moved to Telluride, Colorado during the pandemic. I don't know why I did that, but I did it, and it was fun. And now I am the sales director and curator over at Band Devices, which is a black-owned gallery in West Adams, which they were my neighbors, so before I closed. So it actually made more sense for me to move there and move some of my program artists with me. And here I am.
Terrific. And my next question has to do with the idea of a curator and what curatorial work is. When I started getting involved in the arts, curator was thought of as a person, who worked at a museum or at a library and cared for a permanent collection. Really quickly that changed. And to me, now we're living at a time where one of the most curated moments in history, like you don't just get dressed in the morning, you curate the ensemble of your wardrobe.
You can curate veggies, there's an app for that.
It just went from it's something that a professional does in a museum or a library to something that everybody does with the music they listen to, the shampoos, the body lotion. It's like every moment is covered. So I would want to ask both of you how your ideas of curation or curating or the curatorial mind works for you, and if that's changed over time for each of you.
So for me, it's definitely changed over time, right? Because I come from Curatorial at museums, and that is a very specific project where for 4 years you're thinking a single thought, and then for 3 months you look at the thought in action, and then it goes to another museum where somebody else thinks it through. But because my company, so there's 4 wings to my company. One is corporate curatorial, that happens nearly overnight, right? I can have a full-on exhibition at Google headquarters with 70 artists from Friday to Tuesday, and that cannot happen at a museum, right? So there's one option to it. We also do publishing, we also do, we lead artist studios, right? And then we do curatorial for museums and galleries. So when we partner with museums, we know it's going to be a really long process. When we partner with galleries, we know it's going to be a very market-driven process. When I do something that's super close to my heart, I get to pick the statement, I get to pick the artist, I get to pick what I'm doing, and it doesn't matter where I do it, it's going to be great fun, and it can take 2 weeks, it can take 6 years, right? I have the capability to pick my projects that way, which is really different than how most curators work, especially when tied to a gallery. But I think that because there's curation for the public, right, where there's these monuments outdoors, where there's curation for cities, because I've done that, right? I took on 800 different artists, and I curated this tiny little city in the middle of nowhere where it was a 10-day festival where every mom and pop shop had art in it, right? So that's a very different project than a gallery, that's a very different project than me curating my vegetables when I have breakfast. So I think because I have the flexibility of how I work to make my own choices, I get to select how I want to intentionally work with an artist versus having an environment dictate my process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So a little bit of follow-up on that, Erika. So do you kind of see as to me it's really clear that different projects need different kinds of curatorial thinking and different activities and different considerations. And that's what, I love how Cheyenne said this is about getting into the brain of a curator. And I think that, or at least for, getting into the head of someone, is that it's really about a way of thinking about things.
100%. So my last curatorial project, for instance, was at the Spring Break Art Fair over Freeze Week, right? And it was entitled Undocumentedness, The Joy of Dancing Princes, or something like that. Don't even ask me what I titled my exhibition at this point, because it happened so long ago, 2 weeks. But I worked with an artist for over 6 months, and what brought us together is the fact that we were both undocked. So for that, it was deeply personal, and we both kind of got into each other's way of thinking, and the curatorial statement is more about migration than it is about artwork, even though it concludes in architecture. But for projects like, the city that I curated, because I was handed over a roster of artists and the project was already done, and then it became learning to negotiate how to interact with all of these individuals so that we can create a cohesive statement. So it's not always the same, right? And sometimes it's deeply personal, sometimes market drives what you do, right? Sometimes the museum tells you you have 4 years to have a single thought, and those are great times because if I can think for 4 years of something, that's amazing. But that's not the case of everything. However, I'm also a scholar, right? I'm getting a PhD and I've been in school for about a decade. So for me, when I have a thought, I kind of not just sit with it, but live with it for a couple of months before I put on an exhibition. So for some things, I do have the luxury of just waking up on Monday and thinking about the exhibition, and then by Tuesday night I already hate what I was thinking on Monday, and then it changes by Wednesday, and it just keeps going and going. So it's kind of really freeing to be with your thoughts that way, and then have artists visually represent what you're thinking, or have them inspire what you were already thinking based on their artwork.
Mm-hmm. But flexibility is one of the
It's
things
key.
you love about work of thinking in a curatorial.
Yes, 100%. I love not just that I get to bounce my ideas by the artist, right, but also that they come up to me and tell me, hey, I've been thinking about this really crazy thing that I want to do, and I'm like, that sounds amazing, let's figure out how to make it happen. So it's not just all me thinking, right, it's also them having a conversation with themselves for 10 years that then they get to share with me, and I feel like that's extremely powerful.
And I would imagine that sometimes, like, it is great to have lots of time to mull something over, and other times there's...
Sometimes you don't need it.
Yeah, or if you just don't have that luxury and you have to do something fast, and it might actually surprise you and turn out amazing because you had a deadline.
Some of the exhibitions, so corporate curatorial is super like a quick turnaround, right? Where by Tuesday they're like, hey, we're celebrating whatever history month next Monday. By then we need to have it done. So then it becomes me contacting the 60 people who I already know are talking about that, and then bringing them together in a week, figuring out they could all actually bring their artwork into this conversation. And by the time that I'm done having the 60 conversations to allocate artwork into the space, the exhibition statement is already done because I've been having 60 different conversations about this project. So sometimes it's really generative to just like pull it out and just do it. Yeah.
Ava, do you want to start with the same general idea of how notions of curatorial thinking have changed for you over time? And
They have and they haven't.
yeah.
You know, honestly, it still goes by my gut, my intuition first, my relationship to artists, with artists. That is my primary focus, to be honest with you. I mean, we can use Monique as a perfect example. You know, I was...
Monique Prieto.
Monique Prieto. We were talking on the phone one day, or no, I was sitting in her studio, and I was like, why aren't you showing in a gallery? And she goes, I'm waiting for you to do it. I was like, do you really want me to? And she said, yes. So, I mean, it's still relationship-based for me. But then again, you know, I was listening to you talk about corporate spaces. You know, I did a lot of art fairs. I did 17 art fairs in 5 years. Each art fair had a completely different, well, there were different rules and regulations for one. The fair I'm going to talk about right now is Volta. Volta was a project-driven art fair. So what I would do is I would look at what the theme was that year and then choose which artists I wanted to bring. But I stayed within their parameters. Their parameters were one artist, one project, sometimes two, as long as they were balancing off each other. I chose to go the ballsy route and bring one piece. I did that multiple times. I don't know why, or we sold it every time, thank God. But it was really interesting to see the way that process was different than what I was doing at the gallery. So the gallery, I kind of ran it more like a museum. You know, I really did. I was very oriented towards, you know, I saw a piece of art, I felt something, I would talk to the artist about it. Next thing I noticed, we were in this crazy exhibition schedule with them. It was, you know, I did things from social justice to beautiful paintings to, you know, I started the gallery for mid-career women artists. You know, those are what I call the forgotten ones. And I still believe in those mid-career artists. And I brought in other curators. I like the think tank of it all. I mean, you know, you wrote about my shows.
But so part of it would be like from a view of the world that you wanted to see, or a world you wanted to live in that wasn't there, so you would put together shows that you wanted to see lots of times based on intuition and people being overlooked.
And actually, to be honest with you, it was Acme that inspired all of this. Bob and Randy Summer and Bob Gunderman, I've known them since I was younger. But they really did inspire me and teach me how to follow my intuition, trust my gut, and to believe in one artist at a time. That's what I got out of that.
I don't know that I can do that. So my mission statement for my company is very immigrant and undock artist forward, right? Because there are so many people who migrate every waking moment of the day. And if I champion a single artist at a time, I think that would be a disservice to my community. So I feel like I'm usually doing like 3 or 4 different projects mindfully with different deadlines, constantly, because there's so many people that in my community that don't get these museum shows, that don't get these gallery shows, that I feel like we still need to see their artwork and we still need to celebrate what they're doing. And because, right, my community celebrates in a completely different way than however the White Cube celebrates, then I also feel like I can have all this fun, not necessarily in these white spaces. So more power to you for doing that. I don't think I could.
Yeah. But so would you say, Erika, that your curatorial vision is more of a practice more oriented to group shows than solo shows?
I've had a bunch of solo shows, right? They're easy to do. You just talk to one artist, do one solo show. But even when I'm doing solo shows, I'm usually working on a couple of different things at a time. And towards the end of, the project, I'm already having these people be in conversation with each other to think of a group show later. But also one thing that I'm very lucky is that I have, right? There's a publishing wing to my company. So even if it's 10 solo shows, I can throw them into a publication at the end of the year and they're all in conversation together. So I want them all to also be a part of each other's community, right? Because in the art world, for BIPOC artists, for emergent artists, for immigrant artists, for undocumented artists, the resources aren't always like so available. So for me, them becoming a community is as important as me being a community with them.
And does that ring true for you, Ava? Or?
Yeah, I resonate with some of it. For me, it was I chose 8 artists to represent. And I went, as you know, I went full in. I went committed 100% to these 8 artists. One of them is in the audience today, and I'm still committed to him. And it was easy for me to actually spread apart. Doing the one-person exhibitions, for me, I felt were really important. I didn't want the actual body of work to get missed. And that's really why I did one-person shows. Rarely did I do group I didn't do one group exhibition. I chose to do a different area in my gallery, which was called the Curated Loo. With the Curated Loo, I could put in 75, 80 artists in there. And yes, I did have that at some times. And they were just as fabulous as the one-person shows. But I would definitely put it with, let's just say I did this exhibition called the Dick Pic Show. I chose 2 different curators. It was Kenton Parker and Katie Bodie. The 3 of us worked together on that. But what we did is we curated it so it would go well with, let's say, an artist named Chris Finley and his work that was going on, even though there were completely 2 different separate exhibitions in separate spaces. But I always wanted something so they would be able to kind of interweave with one another. So the performances that would happen in the Dick Pic Show would be able to go with and interweave with what was going on in Chris Finley's show.
How important is history to what you do as a...
What history?
The history is,
Which history?
Yeah. So say more. Yeah.
So I think...
Because to me, it's really clear that working with artists is working in the present, and you're not sorting out things or objects.
I mean, I do pick here and there. I'm really lucky to have great relations with a lot of institutions, so every so sporadically I'll pick something that just makes sense, even though the artist passed away a while back ago. The work is not for sale, nobody could see it, I can't even talk about it. But I think there are a multiplicity of histories that are very convoluted and often not speaking to the work that I'm doing. But I also think that because I'm working currently on my PhD focusing on contemporary Latinx artists, specifically Mexican undocumented and migrant artists, that I'm rewriting that history because it's not as unpacked as art history, but also I'm an art history professor at SMC, so I get to teach the history I want to be taught as opposed to just the one that we know. So different histories are important at different times, and I get to play with the difference of what that means, and I get to highlight the parts of history that are missing in the curatorial realm as well as in my classrooms, right? So when I teach at SMC or at UCLA, my students are for the better part not art historians and not in the art world. But then I do this class where I teach them about migration politics and policies through artwork.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to look at the history that we have in this country and then kind of challenge it with modern artwork, right? And what contemporary artists are doing now. And I find that at the end, my students are super into the art world. Like by the end of the class, they've been to art fairs, they go to museums, they hate curators or galleries, and I love that. Because they become like these critics, oh my God, this woman curator hung that wrong. I'm like, great, I taught you something.
Yeah.
And here's like a science major, right?
Mm.
So I think in a way, you have to proselytize different histories that are not written yet, and you have to create the ones that you want to speak to, and you have to challenge the ones that are written because they're not fully real.
So in a way, like the way you deal with different situations and different projects with different approaches and different outlooks, history is just another element in that, where some projects may tap into undercurrents, other ones may tap into
100%. Sometimes when I'm talking about something now, it's because an issue occurred in the 60s that we're still needing to challenge today. And I can speak to that, right, as a trained historian. But at the same time, if someone walks into the gallery, like I did this in the art fair, and this wonderful woman came in, and I was like, well, my artist is talking about being Docademic, and she's like, you assume everyone knows what a Docademic is, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I am a historian, let me just explain this to you, right? But because I'm able to have a conversation with someone who's coming in at a, basic level, then all of what academia tells you is how you should talk about history, then you begin to unpack it in a different way. And because there's all these people constantly seeing what you're doing, and you're always talking to artists and curators and museums and galleries and people who are coming to see your shows, then you get to think through history in a different way, and people are always informing what you're doing. So I find that super powerful.
And David, I got the sense that some of the artists you were showing because they weren't recognized in, say, a history of LA art. Is that kind of true, or?
It's kind of true, but then also, that's actually where I got my program from, was the history of Los Angeles artists, starting back from the 70s here in LA. And I find that to be really interesting, to find these artists that were, let's just say, the artists in the 70s or the 80s that nobody even knows about. And you can see the influence of their work of all the contemporaries today. I mean, it's all been done, to be honest with you, with the contemporaries that are happening right now. Some variation of it has been done before. But what I really enjoyed doing was taking these artists that, let's just say, were not I consider the artists I worked with to be really great painters, like insanely great painters, and I also enjoyed the light and space movement. So I'm a little bit, I'm a little discombobulated or disjointed.
Well, before you said a lot of the work you did was based on intuition, and the world isn't run by logic, and logic doesn't capture all of art. So
I'm not logical.
Yeah, there's lots of
I don't think anyone in the art world is. It's not just
Well, we can still finish sentences.
That's as far as you go. Well, it depends on the day.
Sometimes.
Actually.
So do you picture your job or your role or your function as any way of like a broadcaster or a announcer or like someone to bring attention to things? Are you
100%. I feel like because I curate exhibitions, but also because I write, but also because I'm constantly publishing, but also because I'm a professor, I'm having the same conversation I'm always having in different arenas. And I'm really lucky that I'm surrounded by all these individuals who are having similar conversations visually, because I, for the life of me, cannot make art. So it's great that I get to bring that into the conversation I'm having. But it's also me having conversations that have been happening for the past 20 years, but we haven't seen them take space in White Cube. So for me, that kind of tension is also super important. So taking up that space within this greater art world is also super imperative for like the kind of work that I'm doing.
You announcer, broadcaster, speaker of truth to a larger public?
No, I don't think that at all, actually. I think I'm there to guide and teach. You know, that was one of the things I really enjoyed about having my own gallery, was being able to meet, let's just say, someone at a cafe and they don't know what an art gallery is. And, you know, I could invite them into the space and I could show them things. And my enthusiasm could, you know, translate. You know, they can understand what real, true enthusiasm is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something they can relate to, and then they can start to relate to the work.
Mm-hmm.
If you love what you do, you proselytize whether you want to or not. Like, you're so joyous about what you're doing, like, people are just like, yes!
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're a communication facilitator? Or are you a...
I could say that.
Yeah. Because in like going back to what I said about the kind of the traditional, the stodgy, the old-fashioned notion of a curator, they were much more, kind of conservatives or caretakers or kind of gatekeepers. And it seems to me you're not gatekeepers at all.
I have been called a gatekeeper. Actually, someone called me a gatekeeper last week.
Yeah. And how'd that go over?
Beautifully. They sent me an apologetic email afterwards.
But talk about like just the idea of what a gatekeeper is and what.
Right, the idea that in my community, right, gatekeeping is tied to all sorts of evils that have been done to like Latinos in LA, in the US, and the world.
Yeah, it's the club you can't get into.
Exactly, it's kind of that. And I have beautiful, wonderful people that, you know, challenge what I do all around, all the time. And I was talking about the art fair, and I was like, there's this one thing, and I'm so excited about this project that I'm working with an undocked artist, and someone was like, but you realize that you are a gatekeeper inside of that community. And I was like, actually, I'm going to fully own that I am. But what I'm doing is bringing people into the community. So for those of you who don't know, being a coyote means that you're a smuggler of undocumented immigrants from anywhere to the United States. And I was like, I'm more of a coyote, mi amor, right? Where I'm like smuggling these Latinos into the white cube. So in thinking through that, that's when I received the apologetic email. I was like, oh, well, actually, if I think about it that way, then you're fine. But I think the curators, the older curators, and I'm thinking about, right, the early curators of MoMA, for instance, who had these like seriously juicy catalogs. They were still trying to communicate, but they were communicating to a very specific audience about something super elitist, which mindfully we all ate up because abstract expressionism is life. But at the same time, that isn't how we communicate today. Right? Not just in community, but also digitally and with one another. And after the pandemic, we all learned to communicate in different ways. So I feel like it's important to not be guided by those principles in as much as we learn from them, right? Because we still make juicy catalogs at museums.
Yeah.
But I don't think they service the same thing now. I feel like that exhibition in New York at the Museo del Barrio with all of the Latino artists, right? Massive, the Smithsonian, massive catalogs. They're super important to artists. But first and foremost, most of the people in our community are not going to spend $100 to go and buy a catalog in a museum. So it's also important to have a blog, right? It's also important that you're ranting on your Instagram. So all these things become like the conversation of the artist, and supporting them isn't always a museum exhibition, which 200-page catalog. In as much support as that. They also need that, but there's also 900 other things they need.
I take great offense to the word gatekeeper.
Yeah. And can you explain why?
I just spent the last year on this app called Clubhouse, where all they would do is, all these artists, I felt so incredibly bad because I felt like they were all completely misinformed about what a gallerist does. We're not evil, you know, we're not this.
For the most part.
Some are.
Okay, I know those two, but we're not naming names.
You say it like it's a bad thing.
I know, right? I think it's more, but I do think it's because of where I came from in the art world and how I came into the art world. I mean, I came in when everyone was just starting. I mean, it was when all the important pieces were coming in from all these amazing artists here in LA. I mean, when the LA scene was actually being formed, I feel like I was just getting started. So I have a completely different take on this. You know, this whole gatekeeper thing, you know, I'm inclusive, you know, I'm available. For Christ's sakes, I didn't have an office. I had a desk in the middle of a gallery. I mean, how much more, you know, do you need access to me? I mean, I was always, you know that, I was accessible.
Too much so. No.
Well, no, I've heard that, David. I've actually heard that. People were like, you need an office, you need to go. And I'm like, I just want to be out there. I want to know, let people in the community where I am, that they're always available. I'm always available.
Well, and to me, the gatekeeper metaphor doesn't work for the things you are involved with, because to me that's a basis like, well, there's only 140 people can fit into the club. And once it's full, it's full.
So we're bouncers?
So yeah, I mean, to me, gatekeeper's an inch away from a bouncer.
Okay.
And it's also to say, no, we have standards to get in, and you're not up to the standards. And it's like, and to me, like one of the great things about visual art is like it doesn't wear out. Like if you you put 100,000 miles in the car and it's not worth as much as it was when you started. But if you find some great work, it doesn't matter if 100 eyes see it, 100,000 eyes see it, 1,000,000 eyes see it. It's still, if it's good, it's going to work. And that's why, to me, it's like what you do. You're much more about putting more people in contact with art than would have been in contact with art if you weren't there. And so to me, that's just the flat-ass opposite of
gatekeeping.
gatekeeping.
I feel like it comes from the fact that 700 people want to get into this club, right? But to that analogy, I'm much more interested in what's happening in the alley, right?
Yeah.
No offense to whatever's happening in the club.
Right.
And mindfully, I play in the same club because I have VIP pass. But I think, right, the bouncers who are taking a smoke in the back are equally as important to seeing the work than, right, the people who paid the $2 million ticket to get into the art fair, because ultimately that's what happened. But I think that you're right. If the work is beautiful, it's going to be beautiful regardless. But how the work speaks in the club versus in the alley are two conversations that different people need to be having like consecutively. And that's kind of like a really good tension to start peeking through as opposed to a gallery or a museum, which is why I don't own either.
See, and I actually like being accessible to both.
You think in a similar way.
I think, right, as an academic, I'm currently inventing a language to talk about migration through art, which has not happened, right? And I just finished my second master's, so it's out there on the planet now. And I get to think about it through this academic lens, through my writing, certainly through my books. And at this point, I think I'm in my 12th. Don't even quote me on that. But I also think that where we're at with all of the artwork that is being made now, that's talking to history, that's talking to accessibility, that's talking outside the club and inside the club, it's also generating a different kind of vocabulary to think through for like the futurity of the art world. And I'm much more interested in where that's going to become, right, for all of the populations that were not invited into the club in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, to me, that's a really neat half of the answer to the my history question. Because that was going to aim to the back, and I was wondering what the front side was.
I think there's so much potential for where we can take it from here, but I also know that we lack so much language for, right? All the language we own is to talk about the guys in the light and space movement. We have talked about that for so long, no offense to them, I love their artwork. But the languages that we now need is about how to talk about the emergent art that isn't just art for art's sakes, right? Like black art in LA, brown art in LA, Asian art in LA now, indigenous art in LA actually is also amazing. So when we're learning and making new vocabularies for what we don't have, then we have the potential to make the art world in the next 20 years a place that actually features us all without the bouncer in the club, right? I'm much more interested in what's going to happen later when my job is obsolete, right? So that's a future I want to build towards, yeah.
It's funny, you just said something, black art, Chicano art, Asian art.
I didn't say Chicano, I said brown.
Oh, yeah, brown, sorry. And Asian art, and I actually managed to do an exhibition right now that is encompassing and has artists from all of those. And it was really interesting because the feedback I've been getting from it has been, where did you find these artists? How did you come to know these artists? And the majority of them are artists I've worked with. They're relationships that have been, nurtured throughout the years. I mean, look, I just spent a year in the middle of nowhere. And when I say the middle of nowhere, I mean the freaking middle of nowhere. I had a lot of time to think, I had a lot of time to reflect on where I wanted to go. I was bored to death, no access to any art, like anything, unless I brought it in, it was not there.
That's what we all did during the pandemic, though. We all curated our homes, right?
Yeah.
We have these skills. Yeah.
Exactly. But then I started reaching out and finding things, you know. I went and hung out in Navajo Nation, and oh my God, the art there is insane, you know. And I'm looking forward to nurturing those relationships and bringing those relationships back into the whole conversation here.
See, I don't have that audacity. More power to you for that, but I'm not culturally competent in speaking about the arts of the Navajo Nation, right? I know my positionality extremely well, mindfully. I'm half Mexican, half Japanese, so I can speak to a lot of different things. I can speak to my own intergeneration, right? I'm a first-gen immigrant. I can speak to a lot of different things, but I don't think that even with another 3 PhDs in Black art, I can fully talk about Black art. So to me, it's more important that I make space, and these are mistakes I've made before. I have done all Black exhibitions and they were beautiful because artists trust me, and I was allowed to speak about what they were speaking to, but now I feel like I'm much more interested in making my cultural competencies speak to the things that I know, and having space for other people's cultural competency to be in the club, right? There's 50, we have what, 2 Native American curators, and one in the Smithsonian and one is coming to the Hammer to do Made in LA. Like, I'm much more interested in having them speak for, right, their competency in their own culture than I am about doing that translation myself, because it's going to be really poorly translated. And mind you, I speak an indigenous tongue, but I don't think I'm audacious that way.
I'm glad you brought up mistake, because I
love making mistakes.
A question about mistakes. In amateur golf, there's a thing called a mulligan, where if you hit the ball so badly, you just get to do it over.
I've also done a lot of those. I'm a golfer.
In life,
you get to do it over?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
if you're so bad, they'll let you do it.
Yeah, but only once. You get one mulligan, so it's but in life, there's often not chances to do things over. And I was wondering if you would care to reflect on and share something you had done and you wished you could do it over. You would do it differently now than you did it then.
I don't have anything that I would rewind. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm very comfortable owning up to the curatorial, all of the mistakes actually, individual, professional, my own mistakes. I'm super comfortable with the fact that I made them because they taught me how to not make them again. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm not going to be giving curator baby Erika any grief for any mistakes she made before she realized any better, right? So I want to be also super generous with the fact that she didn't have all of the knowledge that I have now in making those mistakes. Now I do, so I won't make them. But also, she taught me that. Mm-hmm. So I think curatorial concerns at massive levels mean closing museums down for 3 days to take down an exhibition and put it up again, right? When we make a mistake, we make a mistake. At the gallery front, it could mean removing artwork in the middle of an exhibition that's already up. That has happened to me. So I was working with an artist in Florida on an academic exhibition, which lasts about 7 months, right, because it's in the university. And during the exhibition, the artist decided to pull the work from the exhibition because he was getting a lot of threats, because my artist, mindfully a CGU alum, I work a lot with my people, was getting a lot of heat because his positionality is half Mexican, half Middle Eastern, and he made something that became a religious conflict to the people of that religion. So we had to pull the piece from the exhibition, which we did. We closed down the gallery, the piece was pulled. And on the one hand, right, I was thinking, well, if I knew about these religions, I would have seen that happen before it happened. But also, I can't know everything, right? If there's one thing I've learned as an academic, is that I'm not going to have all the knowledge on the planet. So for me, going through that now puts me at a place in which I know to have these conversations before I go and I put the potentially threatening artwork on the exhibition walls. And we pulled it, nobody was the wiser, nobody got hurt, like, right? The people, we acknowledged that we made a mistake, we were open about it, we apologized, we moved forward. But I think we're human, right? Humans make mistakes, artists make mistakes, and artists and curators should learn to make mistakes and just be honest with each other and the space in the institution. We even opened up a panel to talk to the Latino students of the university about different religions within Latinidad, which ended up being really good, right? Because the general assumption is that in Miami, mindfully, that there's Santeria. If you think of LA, we're all Catholic. Like, it depends on where you're at, but we ended up talking about, right, what it means to be Muslim and being Latino. So I think there's a lot of potential knowledge and growth that can happen from within mistakes, which is why I'm not unhappy I made the mistake, right? But also, I look forward to making many mistakes in the future and learning from them.
Yeah, and if it's a process, it's part of the process.
Exactly.
Ada,
Yeah, I like
ever made a
mistakes.
mistake?
I like mistakes.
Hmm.
I am a walking mistake, and I'm fine with it.
You're sitting.
Yeah, well, now I'm sitting, sorry. But yeah, I mean, I did my first social justice exhibition, which was done in 2018. It was with an artist, and he made decisions that I knew were not in the direction that he wanted to be in. In fact, I allowed him to do it. I said, fine, we'll try it your way first. I said, I just want you to know, this is my feelings about this. I said, but if you are telling me to stand up for this decision, I will fight for this decision, and we will go forward. And thank God, he realized after a week after opening the exhibition that some of the decisions were really bad. And he made the decision to take it down. I think that mistake was fabulous. It taught him a lot, and now he's doing really great, amazing things right now. So,
Did it teach you a lot too?
it did. It teaches me to. In fact, excuse me. I allowed my artists to make mistakes. I thought it was important. I thought it was important for their process as well as mine. I wanted to show them that I was willing to. I believed in them this much, even though I knew I wasn't going to sell shit. That. And I would tell them that. I would be very open and upfront with them. This is your decision. I'm going to, fight for this. I just made sure I had something to sell somewhere else. The decisions, the mistakes were good. I mean, it brought us closer. So as long as the relationships are intact for me, I'm okay with the mistakes.
My last question is a two-part question before we open it. I'm getting the hook is coming. I thought we had more time.
I thought you said till yesterday, you lied.
My watch stopped. What's the most satisfying experience you've had in the curatorial process? And the flip side is that, and what's the most frustrating aspect of your undertaking?
Frustrating is super superficial. When an artist gets drunk at his own exhibit, it's just not going to go well for him. And that happens a lot in the art world.
Good answer.
Artists get drunk after exhibitions, is what I'm saying.
Manners.
Please, thank you. I don't know about the most satisfying, but the
And
one
it doesn't
that,
need to be like a specific event, but like in general.
the one that's popping into my mind is I did this exhibition. So sometimes I just do exhibitions because I'm feeling a specific kind of way and a certain thing speaks to me at the moment. But I did this one exhibition where this wall of glitter kind of was a painting, right? And it was really pretty, and I found myself like staring at it like a crazy person for hours on end when there was no one to gather. But during one of the times in which they came in, people came in to see it, I had a group, what is that arts organization from San Pedro, where they have artists who are disabled, right? But in any case, the group came in to see this exhibition, and maybe?
That's not San Pedro. That's
Don't quote me on the name when I got it. But oh, maybe. Honestly. But they came in to do a tour of the exhibition, and I had this conversation with an artist that was in the spectrum about medium. And I thought it was super powerful, right? Because here's an artist that I don't usually have like a way to talk to. But also, like, in this community, it's not like, they're gonna be DMing me, hey, let's do an exhibition. So after a couple of weeks, the person who runs the organization sent me pictures about the artwork of the artist, and it now kind of spoke to the painting that we were talking about. And to me, that was like the most beautiful thing in life.
The most satisfying is when my artists get drunk.
Different strokes for different folks.
Yes. But remember, I was dealing with not emerging artists at that point, so it was fun to watch them. No, I'm joking. I said one of the most satisfying things is when after an exhibition has been installed and I'm sitting alone with the artist in the space. That is just, there's just nothing like it. Most frustrating, I don't know. There's a lot of things that frustrate me, but not with my artists.
Well, I would like to thank everyone for coming. My name is Jill Stagel. I work with Claremont Graduate University Center for Business and Management of the Arts. We're partnering up with our